Well, welcome to the first episode of the Shoes and Souls podcast. My name is Brittany Stacy, and I am a wife and mom of 3 boys, which means my house is always full of energy. But my 3 boys, I have 2 who are hearing and 1 who is deaf. And this podcast is designed for families just like mine. Parents who have deaf and hard of hearing children who our goal is to raise our kids to know the God of the universe. And the hope with this podcast is that we would run the gamut of the practical everyday needs like get your shoes, we have to go, all the way to the questions of the soul of what is my purpose and why was I made? And so our hope in our conversation through these podcast episodes is that you would walk away with something practical for your day and something encouraging for your heart as you follow God's call on your life. I would love to introduce to you our guest for today. I had the privilege of meeting him a couple years ago, he and his wife. And also, I was thinking about it. I think I've had the chance to meet all 6 of his children, which is hooray for me. And he is most recently transitioned a 25-year role at Deaf Missions as the executive director there. And he passed the torch on, I think, last year, and now is transitioning to other things. He and his wife, Glory, are some of the most wonderful people you'd ever meet. And it's funny, I was talking to my husband, we were joking, but it's not really a joke. After a conversation with our guest today, you can't help but be smiling after talking with him. He exudes the love of Christ and the kindness of Christ for sure. He has so much to share with us today from his experiences. He also has a master's from Gallaudet in deaf education, as well as just a man following Jesus who wants to share some of his heart with us today as parents. So with that, I'll introduce our guest today. Hooray! Chad Entinger. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this podcast and to be able to share from my life experiences and what God's been doing. And I just hope and pray that this will impact families that have a deaf in their families. How to raise children with the love of family and, more importantly, the love of Jesus.
Yes, for sure. I know for myself in conversations we've had, it's always a joy to hear your heart and know that you're such an advocate for parents like me who are hearing. And I'm so excited to get in our conversation. But before I jump ahead, I want to just explain the setup for this podcast. So we have you on your screen have a couple boxes. So I am speaking in English, obviously. Becky is interpreting for me in ASL. And then Daniel is voice interpreting for Chad. So we have tried to make this be open for deaf or hearing, wherever you're at in your parenting journey, in your life. Maybe you found this podcast because someone in your life has a deaf child and you're interested in learning more. This podcast is for you. So we do have a lot going on, but it's the same thing. The voice, the hands, it's all one conversation. All right, so with that, what is one of your favorite signs in ASL or phrases that you use often or that you really like? Could you share that with us?
Yeah, one of my favorite signs interpreted, I could say if we were to gloss it, is kiss fist. And that might seem like a strange sentence if you were to say kiss fist. Well, what does that mean? But you sign it like this. So you're kissing your fist. And it has so many meanings. It can say, I love that. I really like that a lot. If my wife shows me something that she likes and I like it too, then I can say, oh yeah, I love that. I kiss fist that. If my kids maybe are doing something incredible or really awesome, I say, oh, I love what you just did. That's so cool. I say, kiss fist that. I love that. And through text with my family, if we're in a chat or friends, sometimes if I really like something that they said, then I'll use that glossed in my text too. And I'll say kiss fist. So, I just hopefully you know enough sign language. You don't think I'm saying something random or speaking a different language, but I kiss fist a lot of things.
Yes. So the gloss, real quickly, could you tell us what gloss is for those who don't know?
Sure. So, in the deaf community, especially with languages and linguistics, if you want to translate something from ASL, that, obviously a visual language, and then put it into a text form, a printed form, written form, then one of the ways that they would do that is by using a gloss. And so I do want to emphasize one thing with that. ASL in a written language is not a full equivalent. And so that form of expression in ASL doesn't have an equivalency in English, but it helps us to write it down to get some of this ASL communication down into a written language or form.
Yeah. So would that be appropriate then, like if we as parents were trying to do a memory verse and trying to remember how we were going to sign it, to just write what those signs are, not necessarily writing the English? Would that be a way that that would work?
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it can be a really valuable tool. And for some situations, maybe if you want more of a strong ASL, I would encourage always videoing yourself. We're full of technology, amazing technology today. You can use your phone to record your signs. And I think that kids would benefit a lot more through a video compared to a gloss. But gloss is not awful. It's not always the best, but it can be used as a really valuable tool for certain situations.
Yeah, that's a great idea too. If you're memorizing a verse, you could record maybe mom and dad when the kids go to sleep, practice it, set up, record it. And then I think kids would be so excited to watch. It would be like you're a YouTube star, but really it's just on your computer.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. I love it. Awesome. Well, you have so much experience with your time at Deaf Missions and your time in education, your time as a father, as a husband, so many things. But I think one of the things that it would be great to kind of go back to is really your early childhood. And one of the reasons I think conversations like this are so valuable is because we parents have deaf children in our home right now, and we can't necessarily ask them, well, how do you feel about this? And am I doing enough of this? Did you understand that? And do you feel included? And we can't have that interview with them now, but having connections with people like you, we can ask your experience. And maybe it's not the same, of course.
Mhm.
Everything's unique and it's not going to be a hard set. But the hope is that, we can trust God with the encouragement that you have for us and your insights to help us navigate different things. So thinking back to early days, could you even just share with us? I know you've said that you grew up in a strong Christian home. Could you share with us how you became deaf, if you were born deaf, and what was the response of your parents, who are both hearing, correct?
Yeah, correct. So, yeah, I was born in a strong Christian family, strong Christian heritage that I am a part of. And as a young boy, I grew up in a small town, central Minnesota, church there of maybe 90, 100 members. And, you know, it was a very traditional white building church, with a steeple and a cross on top, kind of just a lot of history there, but it was, it would make a perfect Christmas card, right? This old church building, very just picturesque. That's the kind of church I grew up in. So when I was a boy, I had me, my parents, grandparents, and my great grandparents. We were all at the same church. And so that was, I was at that point, fourth generation going to that same church, growing up there. So that's shows that strong Christian heritage that I grew up in, and, the strong expectations of carrying on and passing down your faith. I was born hearing, and at 16 months old, so just a little over one, I got sick and I had spinal meningitis. And so I lost all of my hearing in my left ear and about 75% in my right ear. And plus, I had struggles with balance, especially when it got dark. I wasn't able to see as well. And so that was a really struggle for me, keeping my balance and some of those things. So, there were a lot of impacts of spinal meningitis. I know some people who have died from that. So there's a lot of different impacts it does. So deaf Deafness and balance were the two issues that I faced. Naturally, my parents, as Christians, you know, they were looking at, okay, well, how do we pass on our Christian faith to our son? And so I really thank God for for my grandparents, my parents, my great grandparents, and their faithfulness to Jesus and to the local church. It really impacted me a lot growing up. And so even though I was deaf and I couldn't hear, I could still see it. I saw it through them going to church. I saw it through their lives.
That's so interesting that God gave you a local church that looks like a Christmas card too, to be that iconic image so heavily imprinted, in your mind that I think I love to hear stories of how God makes himself so visually clear to deaf people because one of the fears I have for all of my kids, but in particular with my son who's deaf, is how is he gonna know God? And God, would you make yourself so clear? And then hearing stories of how God just really specifically makes things very visual for them. I think that's another point of that. You have the Christmas card church picture in your head when you think of church.
Right. Yeah. And I remember several years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, for Christmas, my oldest daughter gave me a Christmas card with the front of the church, a picture of the front of the church that looked like the church that I grew up in. And it really impacted me. It brought me way back to my childhood. And I was so thankful for my daughter and just helping me remember, this is where I grew up. Every year for Christmas, we had our Christmas Eve service at the church. And then after service, I couldn't wait to go home because typically we got to open gifts after the Christmas Eve service. And so, some fun things there, a lot of precious memories.
I love that. I love that. So with that, I think sometimes, well, I'm going to just say almost all the time, we as hearing parents, especially, are really hard on ourselves to go, if we're not perfect in ASL, if we're not deaf educators, if we're not interpreters, if we're not audiologists, we can provide no value for our kids. That's a lot of the lie that we tell ourselves often. And so could you speak to, did your parents learn sign? So you have those treasured memories. Your parents must have been perfect at sign and perfect deaf educators and made all the right choices, or what was that like?
Oh, yeah. No, my parents, they were not the best signers. If just being honest, even they would admit that. And one thing that was interesting about my parents and what's something that was really unique about them is my dad signs better than my mom. And typically it's the other way around. Usually it's the mother that becomes more fluent in sign language, but my mom did sign some, and she spoke very clearly. She knew how to speak with me, to speak clearly. I could hear some, I had a hearing aid and was lip reading, and so we developed our way of communication using some signs, some gesture, speaking. And so dad more, even today, as he's gotten older, he still signs as much as he can. And so dad is more kind of adopted that signed exact English sign style. And that was an influence back from the maybe 70s. Well, now you figured out how old I am. But in the 1970s, that was a prominent signing style. In that era, they really encouraged parents to learn sign exact English. And it was following a word for word English order of sign style. So he has that C style. But, that was the signs that he was using of the day. And that helped us to be able to communicate. So I'm really thankful for that. And I feel like my dad really took on the role of being the teacher of the word for me. He took responsibility for Sunday school. So every Sunday, he was a Sunday school teacher, and there was another deaf boy that was coming to our church. So we were in Sunday school class, and he's the one that used sign language, took it on himself to make sure that he signed the best he could to teach us the Bible and, the Old Testament stories. So we went through those things together. On the New Testament gospel, he explained to us about Jesus and, all of those stories. So I still can see in my mind my dad in that church every Sunday. And, he did a lot in church and taught a lot. And so, even during the worship services, he was playing piano. And so we used to sing out of the hymnal and we would sing hymns. Maybe some people don't know that are watching what hymns are, but hymns, these are just traditional songs you read out of a book, a hymnal. And so my dad was playing piano during worship. And so I would follow in the hymnal and I could follow, what we were singing. And at the time of the sermon, dad, he would be on the piano bench. So he would slide around to the end of this piano bench and he would face me and he would interpret the sermon. So he would sign the best that he could while the preacher was preaching. And, I know that my parents, they did the best that they could and they showed their love and continue to show that love for me, which is just incredible. It's not about being the best, it's about being there. It's finding ways to communicate, being involved, being intentional about what you teach, especially when it comes to God's word.
Was it directly from your dad kind of being your Bible teacher, mentoring you along that you decided to follow Christ? Was that at a young age as well?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So when I was 4 years old, my dad went to a conference that was hosted by Deaf Missions. And so he went to this conference and he received a lot of encouragement and training. And the people there at the conference really encouraged him use visuals, use sign language, use everything you can. And my dad came back from that conference. And I remember I was 4. And it was just amazing that it wasn't perfect, but I vaguely remember, and my mom and my young brother, we go to the airport, and I remember this is before 9/11, right? And so if the family could go through security together, you could go up to the gate, wait for them to get off. It's hard to believe we used to be able to do that, but anyway, so we went to the gate and we were waiting for my dad to get back home from this conference. And I remember that he came out of the airplane and as he's walking down the corridor, he has his briefcase with him. My dad had his favorite briefcase. He always carried it with him. So he's walking out and he has this briefcase, and inside he had some different materials and resources that he got from that conference. And so he used all of those resources. And some of that included things like children's books that had pictures. And there were some signs that had been illustrated within each page of the book. And one of the stories was about Samson. And so dad did the best he could. And, since I was 4 years old until the age of 8, he used those books and all of the different resources he had received, used the signs that he knew, taught me on Sunday mornings in Sunday school. And he used to do vacation Bible school, VBS. So dad would take responsibility to teach the 2 deaf kids that were there, me and my friend. And so, through his signing, through pictures, through all of this church support that we had, all these different ways, I understood Jesus and I decided to accept Jesus when I was 8 years old. And so, yeah, I mean, I could go on and on and on about this. There's so much throughout my life, but, try to sum up what happened in those 4 years, and how I've grown up. And since then, I feel really blessed.
Yeah, and me on the other side, experiencing a lot of that, not knowing what to do, trying to get any resources I can, this is a truth that we should know as believers, but sometimes I think God highlights it for us in a different way as parents. We are incapable of doing anything good. It's only his power and his touch that makes anyone believe, anyone understand. And I think often, we can think, "Oh, we know what to say," or we had this, but no. I tell people it's a gift I think hearing parents have to see our weakness every day on our hands and our inability to do the right thing, to sign the right thing, to say it the right way, but it's God's grace to us to recognize it's only his power anyway who could do it. And I think your story highlights that. you know?
I'm sure while I was growing up, he may have felt, am I doing enough? Are these deaf boys, including my son, are they really understanding this? How much are they really understanding, grasping, and processing? I'm sure he had those questions. But as they got older, I think my dad, mom, and the home church they could see the fruit of what they had done. And a lot of that fruit came later as I got older and began a part of Deaf Missions and the work there. And so I would just encourage parents to keep going. Take it every day, take one step a day and do the best you can. And trust in God that He's working through you. You are His hands and feet. You are in this home and you are making progress. Trust His timing to see that fruit. Just trust it. Yeah, and welcome support from your churches as well. Our home church was small. It didn't have a lot of resources, but they did collect money to give to my dad, and he would use that fund to like for that conference, like I mentioned. He used that money to go to that conference. So he was able to go to this conference. And so the church they're the ones that made that happen. And they supported him. And that support had a greater impact on me when he came back. So even I may have shared this before, but some of my favorite memories, this older lady, I call her the bazooka lady in church, because after church, maybe it was before church, but I would go up to her and she always would put her hands in her purse and pull out this bazooka gum. And so she always had a big smile on her face. And, even just that simple, we couldn't really communicate well, but this simple gift that she had, this small gift, just showed that she saw me. My mouth now, I feel like I'm kind of salivating thinking about this bazooka gum and those memories attached to that. But God used that small thing, so even with people that don't know sign language, but the way that they approach people, the way that you look as you approach somebody and just interact, there's so many creative ways for families with deaf children to be able to feel like they're a part of church and to really get involved in so many different ways.
Yeah, I love that those are kind of outside of the box ideas. So maybe a church doesn't have the ASL skills. Maybe they don't have an interpreter nearby who can do something or make it be whatever we think the top tier should be, but maybe they could send you to a conference, send parents to a conference, or connect you with some other resources. Or I love the consistency. And again, God using such a tangible thing in the life of a young deaf boy of bazooka gum, you know, every week consistently from a smiling face to communicate his love. And I think we can often, I think as parents go, it's not enough. And a heart posture before God to say, what are you doing? And to see how God's providing. We can say, where's their community and where's their this and what about this? And so many decisions that we have to make and it can feel, I think it's really easy to go down a daily path of this will never work. Like there's no way that this can end up being enough of what it should be because we're raising our kids in a totally different culture in a totally different way than what we were brought up as. And so to be reminded of God's outside of what our brain can think about what is needed here, the resources, the tools, God can use his body in unique ways to really have an impact.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen.
Thanks for joining the Shoes and Souls podcast. We hope that this conversation was encouraging, and we pray that God will use it for his glory. Join us for part 2 of our conversation with Chad, as we talk more about how the unique influence of Chad's dad and others around him prepared him in the calling that God had for his life. We'll see you next time.